And now we switch to the panel mode, so where it's basically up to you to raise interesting questions for specific panelists, or for one or all of them to answer. Who wants to go first? Please come up here, because otherwise I just run around the whole room. I think it's easier if you come here and line up if you have a question. And while you still are on the way, I have a few questions. My first question was about the incentive thing. You all have touched on it, but I could barely see the commonality between incentivization in all your different frameworks. Is it that they're all different, or do you see some commonality showing up in your very different settings that you have, from the researchers that share data to people doing translations to, I don't know, what all the other tasks are if you measure against the intelligence quotient, about twittering or not twittering. Is this every time a new kind of incentive I have to come up with? Patrick, you want to go first?
So, does it work? Do you hear me? No, okay.
So maybe you can just take two of the these sets and share between you.
Okay, so I think there are several things we use all the time again. So altruism is one typical, which we have, for example, on Wikipedia. There's money, as we have on Mechanical Turk, and there is a big question about how much to pay such that you result in good quality and you result, or you can process your data in the right time. And there's a nice paper from Pedersen published, I think it was 2011 at the CHI, which really shows these different things, these different dimensions we can use to incentivize the crowd at all. But in the end, it's something every designer has to think about when he designs his new application.
Tore?
So in addition to what you actually give to people in order to make them do whatever you want them to do, you also need to check that they actually do it. And that's the second part of incentivizing people, right? There's something you need to trade with them. That could be fun, or it could be money, or whatever else, maybe a good conscience. But I think almost the more difficult part of the incentive problem is to then make them stick to their promise and make sure that that deal is happening. And so it can be relatively easy in the simplest setting that I was discussing, where you have a multiple choice setting and they can essentially check upon each other because you use the redundancy, right? You ask the same question to multiple people, you use consensus, and that will not only identify likely the right answer, but also the people who disagree with that consistently, and you can then use that in order to withdraw incentives from those who try to abuse the system and give them whatever the benefit to those who actually contribute. The problem is that this is much harder in scenarios where it's not just a multiple choice system where you can do very simple counting statistics. And I think a very interesting direction is how to construct systems that allow peer supervision in some sense, where you can use the crowd not only to create, but also to judge what has been created, and then use those judgments to allocate the benefits that you want to give to these people. So I think there were some interesting elements. You almost want to put these patterns that we already know about into a library and make them available. I see some very interesting starting points in this work. So yeah, controlling, unfortunately, because we have, these people are, they're self-interested agents, and in order to control them, we need to think hard about how to allocate those incentives.
Do we need new models? Would existing existing game theory be the model for that, or would we need to extend that?
Yeah, I think we can get very far with game theory. But you know, there's some very sophisticated methods. For example, peer prediction, where you can incentivize a group of people to actually tell the truth about their judgments, because you not only ask them about their own judgment, but also what they estimate the other people's judgment will be, and you can then construct an incentive system that makes people actually tell the truth. But these things are not yet far developed, so we've used them at some point, but they still take a lot of resources, and so doing that with less resources and more accurately and more reliably is a very interesting area of research.
Since the website we have is a government website, and the government is not apt to provide either financial or monetary or any sort of tangible incentives, we've had to rely upon what was described before, almost a peer model, the champion model, where we have noted leaders in a particular area of study or discipline kind of leaning incessantly on their networks to contribute and be a part of the process. And it's a very time-intensive process, and we're still trying to figure out the most optimal way to do it. So if anyone else has any insight, we'd really appreciate it.
So there's a question of, so the power of the crowd actually comes from, in some sense, the complementarity of the answers, right? If in the recipe case, if there were 100 people and they submitted the same recipe, you would not get anything, right? You would just get one recipe. And then the IQ case, if 100 people took the IQ test and all of them basically gave the same answers, we wouldn't get anything again, right? We would get the same answer as one. So there is a notion of diversity. You want diversity in answers, and yeah. So there needs to be a diversity in answers, and in the case of Patrick, you basically give a different question to different people, so you enforce that. But in the case of the recipe problem, and in the case of IQ, how do you have any thoughts? This is a question to the general panel. Do you have any thoughts on encouraging diversity in while doing crowdsourcing?
So let's begin with the desire to share recipes. So in our recipe site, users would like to share their homemade recipe because they may want to give their they may want to get higher ratings, or they want to just see how other users suggest to modify their recipes to become a better recipes. So I think that's what their desire to change. So about your question, I think
So maybe one can make the statement a bit more provocative. Will we then only have pizza recipes because all people love pizza, but we don't have tribes recipes because, well, there's a certain minority maybe only who appreciates tribes?
Yeah. So for the diversity side, if you check the orange side, you will see lots of they will have many categories, and it allows users to share different kind of recipes, and we also see that's kind of different regional preference and how they cook. It's very different, and I think it's also include diversity because if you look at the category, different users or they are more likely to check to go to their category to share their own recipes. So this provides kind of diversity of recipes. Right.
Anyone else want to comment on the diversity issue?
Yeah, maybe just one remark. I think I mentioned in my talk the contextual IQ that we calculated, and I didn't have much time to go into it. But just to repeat, it's essentially the value that the group derives from adding an additional member to the existing crowd, averaged over all the possible crowd compositions up to that point. And this contextual IQ of a person will be high if they help the group change their minds on points where the group is currently wrong but will be right when that member is added. So it's exactly a formalization of of the notion of diversity in some sense. And if we develop such measures and apply them in group selection or in team composition for crowdsourcing tasks, I think that is also a very promising direction. But it will require us to measure more deeply. Whereas currently in Amazon Mechanical Turk, everyone has a reputation, and that might be a good measure of their overall reliability. It doesn't give us any insights into the diversity question. So really, what we would like to work towards, I think, is a multidimensional representation of the users, not only in terms of some overall quality, but also in terms of characterizations of that worker in terms of what types of answers they tend to give, and if they sometimes can hold the correct minority view and things like that. So ideally that we would build up a profile of their abilities from the experience that they have built up on the work, and then use those profiles in order to find the right teams for our tasks.
I completely agree with you, and I think it depends on the task. So in my task, it was just quality assurance. So the diversity for me was quality assurance. This guarantees me that I get good results. In other things like collective intelligence as a term, or when you try to produce innovation processes, you need this diversity for the reason itself. So you get innovations through diversity. But then, for example, in my translation task, if somebody gains a reputation over time, probably I can release some of the diversity and work with less people.
I think there's a little bit of ambiguity about using the term diversity here. There's one kind of diversity as an input to use it via machine learning to get to the right result, but sometimes there's not a right result, but just like a result or many results that should be diverse, which is not exactly the same. But I hand over the microphone to Alex.
Thank you. So thank you for the talks. I really enjoyed them. So just to be a bit controversial, given that it's a panel. So the translation work, for example, I think is great. But if you took a novel, you know, and you did this translation, I think you would end up with a mix of styles, and in a way, you know, the author could argue that you're destroying the novel completely. And so one interesting test would be to take that novel and translate it multiple times and then back to the original language. You would end up with a completely different novel. So one of the questions is, you know, in doing this, I mean, you're doing the crowdsourcing, you're measuring, you know, individual bits, but in the end, the style is getting lost. So how do we take that into account? And are we not getting stuck in these very technical metrics and ignoring the, you know, the human and the cultural aspects? And this applies also to the recipes. Food is, you know, they're all cultural constructs, right? And so depending on your own cultural background and so on and so forth, you will judge these recipes differently. So in all of the cases, I would say, you know, we can come up with metrics that say, okay, this is really working well and so on. And then is this web science, or should we do something that really connects it to people in the end? So
That's a completely valid point. So so I gave you the nice metrics I had. I also had a lot of problems. I'm honest. So, and managing these problems will be future work for at least 2 years for myself. And there's this question about what do we lose and what do we win. That's totally clear. It's always a question, but in the end, it's a question about the purpose of that. So if I use this for accelerating translation processes at all, so make them cheaper, I do something for society because much more text will get available in different languages because we can do it cheaper. If I use it, for example, such that I can write a love poem to my Chinese girlfriend, something like that, it will be quite cool, and there will be something novel. If I just use it for using all the humans here in the room and in the world as a machine for making things faster, then it will be bad. That's absolutely a valid point. And about the quality, I had long discussions with professional translators, with computer linguists, about how to rate correctly translations, so the quality of translations. And we stopped at the moment where we could have say, well, there is no valid metric at all.
Anyone else?
So since you are asking about metrics for novelty, or so in terms of recipe, I think maybe we can create some metric. For example, you can calculate similarity between different recipes, so then you will know whether or maybe you can check the substitute network and check how many steps from the network perspective, so you will know how novel, how different in terms of network metrics. Then you can tell whether the recipe, the modified recipe is more novel than the original. And I think the other thing, maybe you can check the ratings. So if the rating is quite, maybe puts the rating a lot, maybe this recipe may be better, or in terms of novelty or kind of flavor or something. Yeah, so that's what I have in mind.
Thanks for these interesting presentations. I'm going to take here the position that was just presented one step further. Okay, can you hear me? And as the authors are not represented here, I'm going to take their position. Taking the example of the machine translation, shouldn't you have applied your techniques to so boring things like manuals, which are actually very useful to translate, but if you think of translation of novels, I'm not sure you should call Grisham a novel, but okay. Let's take that position for a moment. I guess that the best translations probably are not from the majority, but from small minorities. So you actually, your whole system might work the wrong way. And if you take, for instance, a measurement like whether the same language is used, so good authors often just are very good in finding new ways of describing the same thing. So as actually the whole diversity of the language itself would be a feature that you would like to preserve in the translation. So aren't you just doing the wrong thing there? And we shouldn't have better applied it to manuals. I'm putting it a bit strong. You could have the same argument for the recipes, by the way.
Well, I took the challenging part, so the challenging way. Through translating instructions for technical things and so on is easier than doing just for literature at all. So whether it's novel or not, so whether they do it for books, that's true. And possibly it's the wrong thing, but we try to show that we also.
So I think that's our motivation. So I think it's not very easy because it takes some time. Sometimes you need to think about it for a while. But anyway, I think we just provide a way just to tell you that network can be useful to create a way to just convert the collective knowledge into a network, and I think that's I have.
I would add. Okay. Tori, go ahead.
So just one other point. I think there's a spectrum of things that we can do with these crowdsourcing methods, and some of them are more on the cost-cutting side, so to speak. We can do things that we already know how to do, or some people know how to do, like translating a book, and we can do it slightly worse, but at lower cost and faster, and that could be an interesting space for some applications. Another one is, of course, to be able to do things that we currently cannot do using crowdsourcing or crowd programming. And an example is, I think, there's this blog, the Polymath blog, where problems are presented to the mathematics community, and then the readers of that blog can contribute to solving those problems, creating proofs for certain theorems or conjectures, and work together in a way that was previously not possible, and then come up with proofs that would not have been created had there not been this forum that put people together. So I think those are two different parts of the space people can work in. I think both have great justifications. Maybe The slightly more exciting area is where you do stuff that's currently impossible to do, and I think there are very many fascinating questions. And another group of things that fall into this might be art, which is collective in nature. I think our traditional view of art is very individualistic. There is one artist, and the artist creates the piece of art in a very individualistic fashion. And maybe there are other art forms that are more collective and that could be fostered through this. I think those are interesting ideas. Whenever you can compare directly to the work of a human, to an expert, yes, the results might not always scale up to that.
I had a comment in a similar direction. I was recently discussing with some people from our entrepreneurship department about crowdsourcing. And the interesting thing was we understood something completely different about it. Like I understood with crowdsourcing more the kind of Amazon task-like workers. And they understood something like what is a business model that the people do something really clever, not just like a small task, but like really designing something that then adds to the business process. And somehow my feeling was we don't have the right kind of tooling for that and not the right kind of measures to do this. That would go much in the direction that you just mentioned, like what would be new proofs or new pieces of art that are created this way. Could you see any use for your kind of tools that you have now in this direction? Maybe Jamie?
I mean, Patrick, couldn't you write a new book with your crowd?
Well, I could do this, but there was somebody else already that has done this with, I think it was Turkey from Greg Little, so.
But can I oppose the remark about art? Sorry. Can I oppose the remark about art? I mean, isn't the thing we like about art is that it's just a very individualistic expression, and you destroy the whole purpose by making it a collective piece. I mean, get it into grey mass that way. So, I'm just trying to represent the artist community here, which I'm not.
I think that's a very traditional view. As long as we haven't seen the first collective piece of art, it will be very hard to judge, right? So I would stay open-minded, I think.
But traditional views are not always bad, you know.
I would like to introduce another kind of task where we are actually quite satisfied with asking a lot of people, right? So if we don't know what we find in the future, we use these kind of Delphi studies, right? If you ask one expert, he tells you something. If you ask another expert, maybe he tells you something similar, something different. And the Delphi study, where you ask actually a lot of different people who are experts in their area, is a nice mechanism to get better input than from any one expert alone, right? Do you want to comment on this kind of, let's say, more sophisticated or complex setting?
I find this very interesting, and the question that is important in terms of design for this kind of study is if you ask your experts separately and then collect the results from them, or if you put them into a room and let them discuss it. And I think both of these could yield really different results. The independent case has the advantage that you do not fall into the trap of groupthink, and which could emerge from, for example, a very strong leadership personality who would have a view and then impose that view on the others. And so it could be good to keep them separate. On the other hand, of course, a group discussing things, in particular, if you have the right experts, could come up with a better solution than any single member of the group could do. And I think this design space between fully independent and fully connected is an interesting one to explore, and maybe there are kind of things in the middle where you first ask their opinion independently and then bring them together to aggregate the results. Maybe there could be optimal design somewhere in between.
Right, and then we actually need more sophisticated mechanisms or programming languages, to talk in your language, orchestrate that, right? Because this is a much more difficult or complicated setting than just going to Amazon Mechanical Turk and asking very, very simple things. I think there's a whole spectrum of crowdsourcing or collective intelligence which is waiting to be explored in this context.
I agree, and a part or a goal of our project is also that we will release the software in the early of August, public available, such that people can contribute to the framework itself and make their experiences. So the things about independent and dependent results, for example, we have this with the iterative improvement and the contest. So if I give one sentence to one person to improve it and then give the output to another person, I result in totally bad translations. And the reason is relatively obvious, because when the first person does something bad, it will get worse and worse and worse. And I think we have to do these experiences, and we have to find the boundaries of those kinds of systems. And something like translation is just a step into this direction, making these experiences such that we can build better systems in the future.
Okay, are there further questions from the audience?
So another interesting question is about, there was a point made that users, computers don't tire, right? Users get tired of answering the same question. So there is a story, right? There was a business case business competition which some students at KTH won, and the task was, given an image or a video on YouTube, you have to show whether this is suitable for minors or not suitable for minors. So the company was using crowdsourcing Mechanical Turk to sort of get label data to train a machine learning system. So when they did all this, they trained the machine learning system, and then when they actually evaluated it, they found that the energy required to actually run this system was $1 per video. And the money that they had paid to actually label those videos was just 5 cents. So they thought, okay, forget about it. We'll just use Mechanical Turk to label all our videos because it was 20 times more efficient. But at some point, the users get tired of doing the same sort of thing. And like, do you see this as a problem? And like, are there any design choices to be made to sort of overcome this, to make the problem more interesting for the user? Because it should be a valid sort of design choice in the problem space.
Who wants to go first?
So it's absolutely a problem, and that's the same thing like quality assurance in crowdsourcing itself. So we have to make these experiences, we have to find new methods for managing that. I think we have to be open-minded and look what other people from operations research have done, or in psychology. There are a lot of things around which we can reuse and just implement it in our systems.
Okay, another question? If not, I would close the panel with the last question to all of you individually. What do we miss from the current crowdsourcing systems? Are there variables that we miss? I mean, Jamie, for example, you've talked about things like location, is stuff like that important? Do we miss, let's say, the social scientists' input? I haven't seen much of that in your presentations. What would you say from your point of view, each of you, like maybe just go through the row? What do we miss for the crowdsourcing systems?
Personally, I think we need to be very careful of how we frame our crowdsourcing experiences. I'm reminded of an example of Foldit. How many of you are familiar with the program Foldit? No? Well, it is basically a program to help fold proteins and fold genes. So the scientists who created it framed it as a game, a collaborative game. And in framing it as a game, normal individuals can log on and help to solve these complex scientific issues by implementing a series of rules that follow scientific standards, but that users don't need to have any biochemistry background to actually implement. And within 10 to 15 days, the users of Foldit were able to solve a scientific problem that regarding HIV that scientists had been working on for 15 years. So I think we need to be very cognizant of how we frame our crowdsourcing and exactly which audience we're trying to reach out to.
Well, I think there is a big danger in the whole field because there are a lot of low-hanging fruits for researchers. So things like translating books sounds very good, but it's only appropriate if we try to find some general patterns which we can reuse. And I think this is one of the things we have to go further and further. And most importantly, we have to try that other fields, psychology, social sciences, operations research, come together, and then we should try to solve the really problems we have together, and then probably we have a tool which we can reuse for try to solve one of the big and hard problems of this world.
I will try to begin with the problem of data. So since, just take for our site, for example, because it's an English site, so basically most of recipes are contributed from English countries. So for example, like for some people from Asia or like Russia, they never contribute to their recipes. So this could be result in some bias in crowdsourcing, and the knowledge may be biased toward the English or American food. So I think there could be a problem in terms of data.
I also believe that reliability of the users involved in crowdsourcing is also something that we have to be careful about. For example, in my topic wasn't exactly crowdsourcing, it was like big data analysis, but there were some users that didn't represent the general population. There were some spammers and just advertisers that can cause some bias in the analysis, so we would have to take a look at that.
I think we need to recognize that what we currently call crowdsourcing and also the diversity in the session here, that this is a really broad field. Mostly in two perspectives. One, the sets of problems that we're trying to address, ranging from very simple labeling problems, where you get a sentence and are supposed to label it true or false or something like that, to writing an encyclopedia together, translating a book, creating a piece of art. So this is such a wide range of tasks, and we need to recognize that very different technologies, pieces of technology will be necessary to address those. And the other thing is, in fact, that there is a huge range of ways in which humans can interact to create things together. And so I think we need to stay open-minded and really recognize that this is a huge field that will require much broader and deeper study.
Thanks a lot again for your presentations and sharing your thoughts with us.